Hi folks, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Chud the Builder. Chud is a live streamer who became infamous online for going around Nashville, Tennessee, saying provocative things, one of those things being the N-word, all while carrying a gun. Now, as a result of the content he was creating, Chud has been doxxed, swatted, and attacked in all sorts of ways. His dog has been killed. He was provoking a lot of reactions online, as live streamers often do, and over time, he became an extremely controversial figure because of the kind of confrontational content he was making and the reactions he was eliciting out of people in public. Now, recently, in fact, just a few days ago, we covered the fact that Chud was attacked by somebody, a man who has since proven to be completely unhinged. Joshua Fox, a man with a bizarre rap sheet. And when I say bizarre, I'm not really exaggerating. See, new information shows that Fox, a 31-year-old disabled U.S. Army veteran, was previously arrested in 2024 for aggravated domestic assault in Clarksville, Tennessee. According to reports, he allegedly tried to burn down an apartment building with an aerosol can during an argument with his wife. Now, law enforcement and legal experts have stated that this prior arrest is obviously unrelated to the case with Chud, but it's obviously become part of the public conversation now that more details about Fox are coming out. Just how violent was this individual? What were his intentions? And those are important questions because we now know that Fox had allegedly made previous threatening statements toward Chud before the altercation happened. And according to the narrative emerging online around the case, Fox confronted Chud over comments Chud had made on stream, and Fox allegedly struck first and continued the assault before Chud ultimately fired, and what supporters are arguing was self-defense. Now, the last time we left this story, Chud had been hit with a $1.25 million bond, and people online were heavily debating the situation, understandably so, comparing it to the Carmelo Anthony murder of Austin Metcalf, arguing whether Chud's case was self-defense, whether the confrontation could have been avoided, and how much of Fox's prior behavior and alleged threats should factor into the broader discussion surrounding this case. All that being said, before we get into the newest details and updates, let's take a look at this local news report that just came out a little bit ago.
News 2's Maggie Weaver is in that courtroom right now, and she reports that so far they have heard from multiple witnesses. And according to an investigator, courthouse security cameras captured that incident roughly from 12 different camera angles. Now, so far, a ruling has not been made.
Now, that would truly be a game changer, having all of those camera angles to reveal what actually happened in this situation, because as you'll remember, the only footage the public really has right now is this blurry, grainy, hard to watch cell phone video filmed from a window across the street. The altercation is happening down on the street in broad daylight. So because of the lighting and the distance and this tree covering everything up, all we see are silhouettes. It's extremely difficult to tell who's attacking who struck first, or even clearly follow what's happening during the altercation. But if there really are enough camera angles from nearby businesses, the courthouse, or other sources, that could hopefully provide a much clearer picture of the incident and potentially exonerate Chud.
Chud the Builder, Dalton Etherly, was walked into that courtroom. Now, today's hearing is expected to focus on whether Etherly will continue to be jailed under that estimated $1.25 million bond, or if a judge could change those conditions. Now, investigators do say that Etherly, known online as Chud the Builder, was involved in a shooting outside the Montgomery County Courthouse here last Wednesday. Authorities say both Etherly and another man were shot during this incident and taken for medical treatment. Now, court records do show that Etherly had been at the courthouse earlier that day for a separate civil debt appearance. Etherly is now charged with attempted criminal homicide, employing a firearm during a dangerous felony, aggravated assault, and reckless endangerment. Now, at his first court appearance last week, a judge cited the seriousness of these charges, public safety concerns, and the fact that the shooting happened outside a courthouse when setting that temporary bond amount. Now, court records do show that Etherly has pending cases in both Montgomery and Davidson counties, and at today's hearing, we're expecting to hear more about both those cases as that bond amount is set.
Now, here's where things start getting interesting. Andrew Branca shared this on X, and he later did a full legal analysis on the situation, which we're going to look at in a second. But according to Branca, the state's case against Chud the Builder appears to be utterly lacking in any real legal merit based on what appears to be the official affidavit of complaint that was just made public. This is the affidavit. Branca points out that in this case, the burden is on the state not only to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but also to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. And according to Branca, the affidavit appears extremely weak in doing either of those things. Specifically, Branca notes that there is not a single word in the affidavit claiming that Dalton uttered any racial slur toward Joshua Fox during the altercation that would have provoked the fight and potentially caused him to lose the legal justification of self-defense. He also points out that even if you completely set self-defense aside for a moment, the affidavit still allegedly fails to present any clear evidence-based narrative showing that Dalton committed a crime in the first place. But of course, self-defense is going to be a central argument in this case, which Branca argues only further strengthens Dalton's legal position. Branca goes on to say that if the affidavit of complaint truly represents the core of what the state of Tennessee currently has to prosecute Dalton on charges, including attempted murder, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and malicious firearms possession, then he personally does not see any realistic path for prosecutors to secure convictions on those charges beyond a reasonable doubt based on the legal merits that's currently presented in this affidavit by the state of Tennessee.
What's notable, of course, is what's not here. What's not here is any evidence of a racial slur being thrown by Dalton Etherly at Joshua Fox. Not only is there no evidence, there's not even a claim without evidence. I simply do not believe that if the prosecutor had evidence of Dalton throwing racial slurs at Joshua Fox that triggered this violent confrontation, that they would fail to include it in the affidavit. So I have to conclude they don't have such evidence. Now, could that change? Could suddenly a week from now or a month from now they come up with a cell phone video or a witness that says, yes, I heard Dalton saying, I guess that could happen. And of course, if the facts change, the legal analysis changes. But I simply don't believe the prosecutor has evidence of racial slurs and they left it out. They're not saying it to the media. The same with any evidence that explicitly characterizes Dalton Etherly as the initial physical aggressor here. Not only is there no evidence, everything they cite is completely ambiguous. It's completely consistent with Joshua Fox being the initial aggressor, right? A physical altercation ensued. Like it spontaneously came into existence? They're prosecuting Dalton Etherly, and they're unable or unwilling to say he started the fight. So they're not willing or able to say a racial slur was thrown. They're not willing or able to say that Dalton Etherly was the initial aggressor here. They're not actually able or willing to say anything that's inconsistent with lawful self-defense.
Now, all that being said, what's interesting are videos of Joshua Fox, the man who got into the altercation with Chud the Builder, which are resurfacing where Joshua appears to be making threats directed at Chud the Builder before the interaction or the altercation with Chud ever took place. Here is what Joshua Fox allegedly said on his Instagram leading up to this situation.
Yes, this is my favorite filter. No, I don't like cats. I just think the filter is dope. Anyway, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, a plumber came to my apartment today banging on the door like he was police. I got PTSD. I've been arrested at this residence too many times. So I just hurry up and open up the door because they ain't finna kick down my shit like they did last time.
Now, that's all very telling, to say the least, because what we have here is a complete contradiction to the initial reports claiming Joshua Fox had only been arrested once. Here, he's openly talking about multiple arrests and even anticipating a potentially violent confrontation with police. I mean, that's not something a normal person is thinking about in their day-to-day life, right? Most people hear a strong knock on the door and don't immediately think, oh my God, it's the police, let me go shoot them. Very few people think that way unless they've had repeated confrontations with law enforcement or are already expecting some kind of violent escalation at their door, right? That says a lot as well. Now, all that being said, there are also alleged text messages from Joshua Fox, who is known online and on Facebook particularly as Joshua Love, that a lot of people are now discussing because of what they allegedly reveal. Now, these screenshots were reportedly discovered by a family friend of Chud's, and according to people circulating them online, they show Joshua Fox allegedly premeditating a confrontation with Chud the Builder in order to gain traction for a future Twitch streaming career. These comments were allegedly made on January 10th, 2026, roughly 18 weeks before the incident between Joshua Love and Chud the Builder. The conversation allegedly took place between Fox and users named Kudo Menace and Bishop Remo Menace. In one message, Fox allegedly says, and I'm going to paraphrase because it's mostly broken English, he says, I've been hoping to run into this Chud guy, but he's never on my side of town, but outside of him, I'm just going to call him a bitch and go about my day. One of his friends responds by saying, Chud is just trolling us for a reaction. Don't let him bother you either. I don't think he's really racist anyway, just clickbaiting. To which Fox allegedly responds, trying to get some traction on my end, so when I start my Twitch, I got a little fan base. Fox later adds, oh, he doesn't bother me, I just want to fight. Now, another user, Bishop Remo Yeezy, responds, on the internet, correct, in person, followed by neutralizing the threat and a meme image saying no problem. So needless to say, what all of this potentially establishes is that Fox had allegedly publicly stated months before the incident that he wanted to physically seek out Chud. Even within the messages themselves, one of Fox's own friends characterizes Chud as someone who was likely just doing clickbait and not genuinely racist. According to these alleged messages, Fox's motivation appeared to be gaining Twitch traction and building an online audience, not responding to any actual harm. And perhaps most importantly, Fox allegedly states very directly, I just want to fight. Now, there are several ways people are interpreting these messages, but one interpretation being heavily discussed online is that this could point toward documented premeditation, that the confrontation outside Montgomery County Courthouse was not simply some random spontaneous escalation, but rather the outcome Fox had allegedly been openly talking about wanting for months beforehand. All that being said, as I discussed earlier, Chud is, during the making of this video, in the bond hearing, and it's being predetermined whether or not the judge will accept the bond payment for his $1.25 million bond. And here are some actual live updates from the courtroom.
I just got removed from Chud the Builder's court hearing, but I am here to say that it's probably safely a self-defense issue. The other guy, Joshua Fox, definitely attacked Chud the Builder, and it's going to be a clear-cut case of self-defense. So any holding of him on bail is total bullshit, and he needs to be released. That did not go wrong. He was right to defend himself. Josh Black was having a PTSD episode. He approached Chud first, and threatened his life. He said I was going to kill him.
That was Anthony Vo. I've actually met Anthony before. Great guy. But all that being said, that was a very interesting update from Anthony, especially considering everything that followed afterward. Again, according to reports we saw earlier in this video, there now appear to be well over a dozen camera angles of this interaction, and there seems to be a growing consensus around the claim that Chud was allegedly the one being attacked by Joshua Fox. And as we saw a moment ago, there are allegedly enough messages and enough internet history to suggest that not only that Fox had expressed interest in confronting Chud in order to build up his own online career, but also that Fox appeared to be somebody familiar with violence, arrests, or at the very least, someone who anticipated violent confrontations happening in his life. Now, Anthony describes Joshua Fox's behavior as potentially being some kind of PTSD-related episode, which is understandable considering Joshua Fox was a U.S. Army veteran, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm not going to sit here and fully pathologize somebody or pretend I have access to all the information Anthony or the court may have had. That's likely something that was discussed more deeply behind those closed doors and will likely be made public at some point. But either way, the really important update here is that what happened after Anthony's video started going viral, brand new development came out showing that Chud the Builder was reportedly blocked from using his GiveSendGo fundraising money toward his $1.25 million bond, which is honestly pretty shocking considering the amount of public support and fundraising that had already taken place around the case. Now, there are reports circulating that several live streamers, including people like Aiden Ross, are allegedly coming together to help bail Chud out. Now, all that being said, this particular report and expose have not yet been fully verified, so we do have to approach it all carefully, but I think it goes without saying that this situation is raising a lot of serious questions about potential double standards within our justice system. Why is Chud allegedly being blocked from using money that was fundraised on his behalf to pay for his bail? Is this purely a racial issue, or does this have more to do with the judge or the court believing that releasing Chud would somehow lead to additional violence or controversy? What is the actual rationale around holding him in prison? because people are naturally looking at other high-profile cases where individuals were allowed to raise sometimes millions of dollars and use that money not only to secure their release from jail or prison, but also to fund massive legal defenses and public relations campaigns designed to clear their names in the media. So the question people are asking now is, why does it appear different in this case? Does this come down to race? Does America actually have a two-tier justice system, as the left has often claimed, except in an inverted version of what they often claim? I think these are important questions to ask, especially as more information continues to come out about Chud's case and as the self-defense argument appears, at least from the perspective of his supporters, to be getting stronger with each new report and alleged piece of evidence. Eventually, we're likely going to see all of the camera angles. I'm sure FOIA requests are already being filed, and if this case goes to trial, those videos will almost certainly become public. And if it ultimately turns out that Chud was acting in self-defense the entire time, then people are going to ask a very serious question afterwards. How is it justified that this man had to spend additional time in jail away from his family while being treated like a violent criminal if he was actually innocent all along and defending himself from an attack? You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.